Hello, everyone. My name is Marc Sabatella with the Mastering MuseScore School, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So today, I have mentioned this is Jazz Appreciation Month in general, the month of April here in the U.S. And I like to, I'm a jazz musician myself by profession, and I talk about lots of different kinds of music here. I've been spending a lot of time talking about counterpoint lately because I'm teaching a counterpoint course. But I thought today would be a good time to show you an actual jazz fugue that I wrote some years ago. So hopefully, again, I'm still experimenting with how I'm doing the sound and all this. So let me make sure that things are okay here, and we'll check the chat here. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about this piece. The piece itself, let me bring it up here. Actually, first I want to into paste a couple things into the chat. So give me one moment. First, I just want to pin my website. So this whole thing, as always, brought to you by Mastering MuseScore School, where no background music. Seriously, you didn't hear the music? That's problematic then, or at least it will be in a little bit. But it's okay. I'm going to be playing the keyboard for a little bit, and then I'll readjust the sound later. So that is a bummer though. That tells me then that what I'm listening to here on the headphones isn't working. So I'm just going to put that off. But as long as you can hear me, I think we're okay. So let me come back over here for a second and just check look at that, choose device. That's the problem right there. That should do the deal. Let me just play music for a second just to find out if it did anything. So, any better? Doesn't really matter because I'm gonna have to fiddle with it again when I'm done playing. But anyhow, so I was starting to get the link to my site into the chat just so it is there for anyone who's not already signed up for the newsletter and so forth. Please encourage you to do so you can stay informed about stuff, and in particular make sure in the masterclass here so that you'll get notifications about this specifically. So no, still no sound there. All right, well, whatever. I'll fix it later. Because as I mentioned, I'm going to actually play this piece on the keyboard here because it's the kind of thing that the MuseScore playback isn't going to work for, because as a jazz piece, it's got improvisation built into it. So I'm going to post now the link to where it is, and I'm going to recommend that you all bring this up as I play in a separate window so that you can actually follow along. There's the score. And so this is the score here on musescore.com. And let me kind of walk you through what you're looking at here. The first page is the exposition of the fugue. It starts off with just, and I went to a single staff here, so it fit on one page nicely, and it's kind of a jazzism that we don't always show both staves of a piano part. So my original subject is here. Actually, let me turn up the volume on the keyboard. I'll play you the subject first. That's basically the subject. And then there's just a couple extra little notes to get us to then the first answer that comes in, and then a second one. So it's a 3-voice fugue here. And then it goes straight from that exposition into an improvisation. And it's basically using chords that are inspired by it's basically the chords that are implied by the actual counterpoint in here. I mean, if you actually sort out what's going on harmonically in any given measure, if you look at this measure, right, this is basically a C minor chord, and then to F minor, and and that is basically, does that happen in here exactly that? No, it doesn't, because yeah, I modified this stuff. That's all I can say. So I took this as a starting point and then came up with a chord progression that I thought was similar enough to the harmonies, but I wanted to turn it into a simple 8-bar thing, because the original thing was actually like 8 bars here, but then it's like 10 bars, and that's actually where I got myself off, is that C minor is at the very end of that. That's really this C minor here. And then it was 10 bars because I had to do some stuff counterpoint wise to get where I wanted. And then the last phrase is 8 bars. So I basically adjusted the middle phrase to still only be 8 bars so that it would feel better for improvisation. I didn't have to do that, but I chose to. And I simplified it to just 1 chord per measure, even though the actual fugue has multiple voices per measure. And then the next thing that actually happens is some more composed music that's kind of interspersed with improvised music. So you'll see, right? But then, so there's a second voice that comes in here 2 measures after F. And so it's and then a third voice that comes in here. So that there's basically, this is like the middle section, the development section of a 3-voice fugue in stretto, because right, that's part of the theme. That's all the subject. But then starting there in the 3rd measure, and then the 3rd voice enters. So there's this stretto thing going on, overlapping statements of the subject, and then a little bit more improvisation, and then another entrance here, and then that's the subject there, but again in the 3rd measure, so that I get overlapping statements, and then another statement 2 bars later, and then a little more small improvisation, and then there's more, and then right. So this time the stretto comes in 1 bar into I, this overlap, and so this is like maybe the most complex section as far as that happens, because I've got 3 statements of the subject, each happening only a bar space. It's not like super dense or anything, but it's the most complex compositionally what's happening in this section. And then I give it a couple bars of improvisation to wind down, and then I end it more like it was a jazz tune by just playing the melody, not trying to play it as a fugue, but play the entire melody, kind of an ABA, where the B section is just the transposed version. The answer, the transposed to the 5th version. So anyhow, this so click the link so that you can be viewing it and following it along, because I'm not going to be able to scroll the score right while I play. I can at least put it in, show the first page in MuseScore here. There we go, so that you can see the thing here. And I'm just going to play it. So I've practiced it a little bit, so you can at least see the first couple pages there. A little small, but you don't need to see the inspector. You don't need to see the play panel. There we go. So now you can at least see most of it, even if it's pretty small. But yeah, if you have it up in your browser, then you can go. So I'm going to go. Oh yes, it is very similar, right? So the well-tempered clavier C minor fugue. Right, it's got that going on. I'll talk a little bit more about the compositional process for this after I play you through, because I want you to hear the whole thing, how it fits together. So I'm going to go through that improvised section here twice. So it's 24 bars long. I'll play through that section twice, and then I'll be at letter F. And if I think of it, I'll try to give you a little head nod so that you know I'm at letter F if you want to follow. All right. So I practiced it a little bit. a little nervous. I'm not. I get nervous playing in front of people now, even if it's just like this. So here we go. Okay, so that's the piece. And when I wrote it, I remember a lot about the process of writing it, but not a lot of the really important details that I'd love to be able to share with you. So the one thing that, oh yeah, the red circle was cool, wasn't it? You remember where that was? It's under the accessibility settings. Because now I'm going to want to start jumping around the score some. It's in the accessibility on-screen keyboard. Where is that thing? Additional large mouse cursor. Was that? No, it's not. It's highlight mouse cursor. There we go. Haha, there we are. Beautiful. Okay, so thanks for the comments, people. So the thing is, I wrote this piece with a little bit of a goal in mind. There's this amazing saxophone player who lived here in Denver. He's moved to New York now, named Akash Mittal. And this guy, he's one of my favorite musicians that I've ever met. Akash has a way. I mean, first of all, he's of Indian descent. He's a jazz musician of Indian descent and does like an Indian jazz fusion thing that's totally his own. And I would say his command of rhythm is like just totally light years beyond anything I've ever encountered. And I think, well, a lot of Indian musicians, that's true, but within that genre, and Akash has figured out how to take it out of there and bring it into a jazz genre as well. So let me click over here. And get this back to full size. So anyhow, I was doing this duo gig with Akash at like just it was at a wine bar or something, and I just wanted to write a new piece for us. And I don't know that it started off as a fugue, but I wrote this subject here, right? I wrote that subject not specifically bringing to mind Bach, although I recognized pretty early on that it was reminiscent of that particular fugue. But I want to come down here and show you how I wrote it, because I think it's actually instructive to understand the process here. When I wrote this fugue, I first of all did not. I wasn't positive it was going to be a fugue, but I kind of understood pretty early on it was going to be basically fugue-like. But what I didn't understand is what time signature it was in. So I wrote this piece, and hopefully you can see this well enough. But if you can see this here, I wrote out the notes, and I think you can probably tell the bar lines got added later. They totally got added later because at the time I actually thought it was distinctly possible that it was 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I thought the downbeats were somewhere other than they actually were. I didn't know I was writing in 3. I just wrote a stream of consciousness melody that, yeah, my brain internally must have realized it was in 3, but it wasn't. It was not what I thought I was writing. It was only later when I added up the beats and said, well, gee, that's 20, that's 24 beats. I guess if I, actually it's only 6 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because that last bit, this last bit, that's what we call a link. That's not part of the subject. That's just to connect it to the next phrase. And so, I looked at it and said, well, it's 18 beats. I guess maybe that's 6 measures of 3. Let me see if it works out that way. And then I realized, oh yeah, it does. So I really didn't write it with that in mind. So then once I wrote it and once I realized that was the case, then I started working on, okay, how's the response going to go? And then how is the counterpoint against that? And so it's all handwritten here. And, you can see some stuff, some details I kind of left out and added later, and it's not particularly pretty. You could see that apparently the eraser wasn't working on my pencil, and so I just sort of scribbled some stuff over here. I don't even know what I'm going at. So that's how I wrote this piece. I wrote it at the piano, and then wrote down parts of it, and then it didn't get entered into software until not much later. It was like, I either wrote this all in one day or it was across the course of like 2 days, but I wanted it done in time for that gig, and so I think I finished it like at 4 or 5 o'clock, and then packed up and drove up to Boulder where the gig was. So that's kind of where the piece came from. And this whole idea of interweaving between composed parts and improvised parts it's kind of a thing for me that I gravitate towards and really enjoy in music. There's the cliche in jazz is we're going to have a tune. It's 32 measures, it's 12 measures, it's whatever it is. You play the tune, then you improvise on that chord progression a bunch of times in a row, and you just kind of go over, put repeat signs around it, and everyone goes around. He goes around twice, he goes around 7 times, he goes around 3 times, whatever. And then you play the melody at the end. It's actually a version of sonata form, is really the closest thing. And I'll probably make that like another little theme of mine to talk about sonatas after I wrap up all this fugue business. Semester finishes up this week, and then next week is finals week. So my obsession with counterpoint isn't going to end, but my incentive to just keep talking about it and keep it fresh in my mind diminishes after next week. So anyhow, sonata form is kind of this normal thing in classical music where you have a subject statement or the exposition where you state your themes, and then the development section where you improvise with it, and then the recapitulation where you restate the original themes. So a jazz performance is usually like that, but it feels like that whole middle section with the improvised stuff, it feels less structured. I mean, yes, we're following a structure, we're following that same chord progression, but I miss the structure that the composition provides. So I don't like having all the composition only at the beginning and the end and improvisation in the middle. I like to be able to spread things out more. And so this is just one example of that, where I've interspersed bits of improvisation with bits of composition. It's very typical, like in big band writing. If you're writing for a large ensemble, then yeah, you don't do the play the melody, then everyone solos, then play the melody again. Big band writing always involves more because that's attracting composers basically. But even if I'm writing something that's really just for solo piano or piano saxophone duet, or actually my favorite version of this is when I arranged for string quartet plus piano. So yeah, the idea that I wanted to tie these things together and have the improvisation interspersed in there, and that the beginning is completely through composed, as you can see, every note in its place, and it's totally by the book fugue. And yet, does it really sound Baroque? I don't think it does. I think part of the reason it doesn't is because of how I play it, right? Before I gave it a title, I got to tell you the story of the title, and then I'll probably move on. Um, but before it had a title, the working title was just Romantic Fugue. That was it. It was a fugue, yes, and it followed kind of Baroque counterpoint rules, but stylistically, other than being jazz in the sense that there's improvisation, stylistically, it's most in keeping with the Romantic era, right? This feels like, more if Chopin were to have written a fugue, this is what might have come out. Not, it doesn't really sound like Chopin, but it sounds like it's of that era in how I play it, how I'm being very rubato with it, very, I don't know, drawing things out and not just, you can do that with Bach, but it typically isn't designed to work that way. It's typically designed to work at a more even pace. And this piece was from the beginning designed to work in this sort of more rubato way that I'm playing it. So the title, Different Worlds, I would love to be able to tell you that the title is just a reference to uh, the combination of jazz and classical. But that the world of jazz and the world of classical. But in point of fact, that is not it. It's a reference to a Far Side cartoon. And I should have brought this up already, but I forgot. And let me see if it'll show up in a search. Yeah, there it is. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to close that window for a second so you don't jump ahead. The idea was I had this notion that the song sounds pretty tragic to me, like it's oh, by the way, that red circle is that was an accessibility feature on my Chromebook here. Windows has something very similar. I would have to imagine your MacBook does too, probably in the accessibility, wherever there's settings to deal with low vision users who maybe need help seeing the cursor. That's really what that was designed for. Yeah, I had the sense that this was a tragic piece. Like it felt epic, like it could be like movie theme music, but not a movie with a happy ending, right? And I was like really envisioning something really dark, like someone who's set it upon themselves that they're going to climb this mountain, but they just die on the way up or something. It really had that. But then I was like, well, that's a little too dark. And then I was like looking for, well, it's just the story of okay, I'll be all personal and sexist about it, but the guy who wants this girl and in the end does not get the girl, right? That's basically the gist of the thing. And so I wanted to find a title that somehow captured that sense of this longing that does not come to fruition. So that said, I started to do random web searches, and what came up was this utterly, utterly brilliant Gary Larson cartoon. So there it is. Guy's lying in bed. I wonder if she knows I exist. Should I call her? Maybe she doesn't even know I exist. Well, maybe she does. I'll call her. No, wait. I'm not even sure if she knows I exist. Dang. And there's the woman saying, you know, and she's, lying in her own bed in her own room thinking, I think I really like vanilla. And the caption is same planet, different worlds. And I was like, there's my title right there, different worlds. So in any case, that's where the title came from for this piece. So yeah, this piece to me, it's not the only thing I've ever done in which you could say, in some sense, I've attempted to fuse some classical and some jazz elements. But it's one of them, and it's one where I think I did so pretty successfully, and a lot of people definitely have enjoyed this piece over the years. So I'm going to now turn my attention to looking at some of your music, and as I do this, I'm going to disconnect my microphone, and high likelihood the screen will go blank for a second or two or more, so don't freak out if that happens. Here, I have to reestablish it. Okay, hopefully it's all back and things are good. So I'm going to now come over where I can be comfortable and talk about your music. Okay. All right. I'm going to see if I've missed anything else in chat here. I think I got it. So, yeah, I suppose anyone would be able to read my manuscript except me, which is, that wasn't the intent. I'm capable of writing, legibly when the situation warrants, and but I've come so reliant on software that I hardly ever handwrite music for anyone else. But yeah, I definitely do. But when I'm composing, well, actually, let me just show you that manuscript for a second. Yeah, I lost where it was. Somewhere in one of these windows is the manuscript, right? There it is. You can see places where I just have note heads. I didn't even put stems or anything on it. I write like that a lot. Because maybe I haven't worked out the rhythms. A lot of my music isn't like squarely in 4/4. Like this original piece here probably didn't even have stems. It was probably just note heads, and then I worked out rhythms because I really intended it to be pretty free flowing. And a lot of that's also the case if I'm like transcribing something from a recording. I'll get the note heads first, then I'll put in the rhythms. And so I often do a lot of stuff. You can see that happening in that little link part here, where I just threw some note heads in, and and then I drew a little arrow to say, oh, that's where it goes, right over there. So yeah, it's my own method, but it works for me. Okay, so I've got a couple other pieces queued up to talk about today, and one of them is I have to know this is Emmeline, if I'm saying properly, Halstead, and I have to know William related. I'm gonna guess maybe so, but can't prove it. But I'm so this is someone who's posted their first piece, and it has the word jazz in it. So there you go. So I guess one question is, and this is here on the website. So let me go back to where, sorry, don't mean to make people dizzy by flipping around so much, but now I can't remember where I put the dang thing. Somewhere I've got there it is. Here's the music masterclass. And if I go to discussions is where she posted a link to the thing, Jazz Horses, right here. So here is the piece on MuseScore.com, and I'll post that into the chat. All right, brilliant. Okay, so your sister, yes, and yeah, you're here. Okay, cool. So I like this piece a lot, and Emmeline, I'm if I'm saying that right, but your comments here about portraying a battle between horses. This is very helpful in understanding the context of the piece, just like me talking about the context of different worlds. and what I'm thinking about. Anything else you want to tell us about it, musically, what you're going for, would be, feel free to type into the chat, and then I can try to respond to that. What I'm also going to be talking about is, okay, well, the word jazz is on there, so I want to talk about what feels like jazz about it, and what's uh, um, because I mean, obviously, there's no improvisation written in the piece, so it's that's not to say it can't be considered jazz, but it's using some jazz sounds, and I'm going to talk about what I mean by that and see if that's what you meant by that. So I'm going to play it from within MuseScore, though, so that I can do the things. Well, I am going to play it with the dynamics for now. As I've discovered in the past, it's often better if I remove the dynamics while I'm talking about the piece, so that I can play it. You can, the quiet parts you can still hear, but I'll play it as is with dynamics. And I'm going to turn off the repeats because that saves a little time because I talk too much. Here we go. Yeah. So I really enjoy uh, a lot of things about this piece. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that to me are noteworthy, and then see if we can get any more discussion about anything here. So the first thing that I would observe is the opening theme has to me almost the exact same quality about it that I was talking about. And again, I can't remember where anything is here, so I'm flipping around. But the manuscript of my piece, where I said I put in notes and then I figured out where beat one was and realized, oh, it's in 3/4, sorted it out. This piece has very much the same character to me, where I feel like this is the kind of melody that one would write if one didn't have a preconceived notion that one were writing in 4/4. And you wrote a melody and then said, okay, what time signatures in? How am I going to make this work? And you pick something and make it work. It has that character. And this is to me a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying this as a bad thing. I'm curious if that was your experience in writing it, like it was for me in writing that fugue. When I say it's a good thing, is this is what allows things to feel like they're breathing a little bit. I mean, if you write something in 4/4 that's obviously in 4/4, I mean, that's fine. Tons of music is that way. But then it feels like it's obviously in 4/4. Like the next phrase is there, do da 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 do da 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 da. I mean, that's right. That's really clear, really straightforward how that parses in the ear. And a lot of music is going to be like that, of course. There's going to be a very clear, strong sense, not just of the pulse, but of the meter, where beat one is. And it's fun to have music in which those lines are blurred. I mean, really, that's an ancient thing. I mean, that's Renaissance music was written without bar lines because they didn't want to have, or didn't really even conceive of it as a thing that you should have, of any strong sense of a meter where there would be particular bar lines in particular places dividing the piece up into bits of the same length over and over again. So I like that aspect of this, and I like how that gets carried through in different places. There's some places where I feel, okay, well, this feels like a pretty clear 4/4, and this feels more vague. And I like how that theme keeps coming back. I like the repetition of that theme and how it's interspersed with other things. Form-wise, I never really thought about this, but I guess technically it maybe would count as a rondo in that you have that theme and then some other theme and then that theme and then some other thing and then that theme again and then something else and then that theme again and then something else. So as far as form goes, it's closest to being a rondo to anything else that I could put a name to. And again, if you've got some other particular thing that you had in mind, uh, then feel free to let us know. So yeah, I mean, it's fine that you thought of this in 4/4, but I just like the fact that it's kind of phrasing across the boundary, and that's another jazz ism in that even if I'm improvising over a piece in 4/4, which let's face it, 95% of what I do in jazz is improvising in 4/4, we go out of our way to make our phrases not squared off in these measure boundaries. We try not to phrase the way people write, basically. We try to phrase in ways that blur the bar lines. That's part of the language of jazz. So that is something in here that feels jazz-like. Um, so another thing that's happening is just harmonically. I'm gonna actually kill. I'm gonna start killing the dynamics now because they do get distracting as we. Instead of, I'm just gonna turn off the playback of the dynamics. I don't have to delete them. I realize. I just need to turn. Oh, wait a minute. Is there not a turn? Is there not a? Oh, I can set them to 0, but that's just as well as deleting them. Well, I can set them back later. I was thinking I could turn off the playback of the dynamic, but I guess that's only for like hairpins that I can do that. So I'll select all those, get rid of them, and then get rid of all the hairpins too. This just makes it easier to just focus on the note stuff. So if you look at just the combinations of notes here, this combination of notes, let's zoom in so now we can actually see what's happening, shall we? This is not a sound I can put a name to chord-wise. It's a D, a G, a D, a G, a C, and an F sharp. I mean, maybe if you had to put a name to it, you could say, oh, it's a D sus. It's a D7. I would say sus because it's got the 4, and that's usually this thing that we do of having the 4th and no 3rd, but you have the 3rd there on top. So and this is a sound I actually used quite a bit in different worlds also, this idea of a dominant 7th chord in which you play both the 3rd and the 4th. It's not a super common thing in jazz, but it's done well. It can be really beautiful. And so to me, instantly, that sound is like, oh yeah, I use that sound. So there's this sound. On the other hand, there's something about this that feels more like it's a G chord, even though the D is on in the bass. And certainly when we get to the next measure, right here, we have something that's more recognizable, just G major 7. But in any case, the idea that we have almost the entire G major scale being sounded in these first two measures there. In fact, the only note that I think we don't see anywhere in there is an A. Yeah, that's probably true. It's probably the only note of the G major scale that never manages to sound. And yeah, if I added an A in here, I don't think, oops, I didn't mean to add it wherever I just added it. So let me click over here and add an A and put it here. You barely even notice anything is different about that A because it's totally consistent. This idea that you could take an entire scale and play all the notes of that scale kind of in any combination, and whatever note you put in the bass is going to assert itself as a root, and then you've got this just wash of color on top of it. This is a big part of the jazz vocabulary. So everything about these first couple measures feels like it's speaking this jazz language in terms of the harmony. Now other places are much more straightforward where I can say, oh yeah, well, this is this chord, this sound here is a B minor chord, and my ear hears it that way. The C sharp is just a 7th. But there's other places where, it's pretty, it doesn't sound like you were thinking that much about chords. It sounded like you were thinking about the colors of the just how you're combining the notes of the scale. And then the other thing that's really interesting to me is you go through the first 7 measures here completely diatonically. And oh, when I said this was D7, I was thinking of this as a C natural, but of course it's not. It's a C sharp, right? So it's actually some other chord entirely. It's D major 7 sus, which is not even a thing. I mean, technically, if you put that chord symbol down, I'd figure out what notes are in it, but no one does that normally. So this is another thing that makes it really feel more like G major 7 with a sharp 11 is what the C sharp would be, because that is a thing. So this all feels like G major 7 sharp 11. Anyhow, so it feels like this is all kind of feeling like a tonal center of G, using that C sharp, which is kind of a Lydian thing as far as that goes. So it all feels like these are all language that jazz musicians would be really comfortable speaking and sounds would be comfortable making. And then after all that sound of all these different sounds in that key with no accidentals, suddenly we get this passage, which sounds like it's a totally different thing. And so, as far as contrast goes, I mean, you don't get more contrasty than that. Well, you could, because rhythmically it's still very similar, and that's what's kind of cool about it, is you're tying together the rhythms, and yet harmonically now it's like totally atonal, right? I can't put names to any of this. I could make them up, but they would be meaningless. They wouldn't really tell me any. It wouldn't add any value to try to put names to any of this. So, in fact, if you had told me that, oh, this was a 12-tone roll, I studied the music of Arnold Schoenberg, and I was going out of my way to do what Arnold Schoenberg did, and this is a tone row: G, B flat, F natural, C, G. No, you repeated that note, the F sharp. Yeah, I don't think it's a tone row, but boy, it almost works out that way. If you don't know what a tone row is, look it up. It's an interesting theoretical concept. Um, but it has that vibe about it. Of a tone row is basically you take the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, arrange them in some order, and then call that your melody, and then you base your piece on that. So your piece is based on the entire chromatic scale, but with the notes arranged in an order that is meant to be not tonal, not to suggest any chords, not to suggest any key, to go as far, to try as hard as you can to not sound like you're trying to play a chord in a key. And feels to me like you were doing that. Although the left hand is still mostly within the scale, even when the right hand isn't. So in any case, I could. It's not a tone row, but it has some of the that kind of sound. If you listen to Schoenberg music, you'll hear sounds that are very similar to that. Um, so yeah, and then there's the passage in here, which I believe is where you talk about the horses taking a break and they're fighting or something. I've forgotten the story that you have in here. You stopping for a breath of air and size up. Yes, so that's looking for a new place to strike. So that's the story being told during this spot here, where the texture thins out greatly, and then back to our theme. By the way, as a notational thing and use of MuseScore-ism, this measure here is right. It's empty. You've got all these rests because I assume you had notes in there at one point and then deleted them. The way you actually would want to do this now is select the measure and press delete, so it just is a nice blank measure. We don't. There's no reason we should have to see those rests there because they aren't telling us anything that just a plain measure rest wouldn't have told us. So yeah, those are just some of my observations about what's going on, and yeah, I really enjoy the piece. This passage, parallel thirds moving like this. It's a time honored device that's also really nice. That's nice to use, and this feels very less ambiguous as far as the meter goes. It feels related to some of the other, this or this. This passage feels related. All these interspersed things that come in between this main idea feel like they belong to the same piece, and yet they're different expressions of ideas. They have different textures, kind of different tonal areas they go to, and yeah, it's to me very nicely constructed in those ways. So those are the things that I wanted to observe about that. And again, Emmeline, if you want to type in anything else in the chat about any other things that you've got questions about or that you want to call attention to, feel free. Meanwhile, I think. Oh, by the way, since we're also just talking notationally, a couple things that I see that are kind of worth pointing out. This F sharp as a 16th note, I would claim there's no reason for it to be a 16th note. In other words, if you wrote that as an eighth note, we would not hear the difference. It's a short note, yes, but if I wrote it, see, the thing is, pianistically, I can't play all those notes at once anyhow. It's going to be a rolled chord, and then I got to immediately come off this note to come back down here. So pianistically, I'm going to play that note the same way, whether you call it a 16th note or an eighth note. So if you call it an eighth note, it looks a little simpler, a little easier to read. And then if you're really saying, well, I want the playback to still be short, just, oh, not that dot, staccato, Shift S. And then it's basically what you wrote, but it looks a little cleaner. There's a couple other places where cleaning up the writing would help. These two eighth rests at the beginning of this measure should really just be a quarter rest. So I select it and press 5 there, and now it's a quarter rest. Oh, here you do have it as an eighth note, so good. There's that. This tie is pretty distracting here, and I'm not sure. So assuming you really did want to hold that C sharp, I can't physically hold that C sharp while I play those other notes anyhow. So I would claim that this is impossible to play. Maybe I'm wrong, but I sort of suspect it is. And I think just eliminating it and eliminating the tie would be clearer. But if you really say, no, I want you to try to hold that note and do what it takes to hide it, then to tie it, you might have to do something like, well, I'm going to press X to flip it up. Is that going to help me? No, I might just have to click that thing and kind of drag around to try to just eliminate some of the visual clutter there. And there was one other notational thing somewhere that I wanted to call attention to, or maybe that was it. Maybe those are the ones. Yeah, those are the ones. So yeah. So anyhow, great job. I want to now turn attention to a piece by Jean Gaunt, who's been commenting in here. I think we looked at something maybe at some point, but I don't really remember. I don't know for sure that we did. But I know I've interacted with you. So this piece is fun. It's a spring song, and this time I did look at the lyrics as they go by, and they are humorous. So we're going to hear this piece, and then I'll talk about this. This is a piece of another character. This is a spring song, right? This is one of the things that we're supposed to be working on now, and it's a spring song with lyrics about spring, and the harmonies are very straightforward, kind of jazz pop kind of harmonies. So we're going to hear this now. All right. So yeah, Gene, love the song. Love the song. It's deserving to be sung. And because the melody's great, the chords are great, the lyrics are clever, and yeah, I would love to hear it actually performed at some point. Um, so one of the first things that caught me when I heard it on the website is that sound. That synthesizer sound is a sound that I associate with like Pat Metheny group, Lyle Mays, who just died recently ish. Um, so that sound, and I was like, oh, did he use some special sound font for it? And maybe you did have a different sound font on it, but it's basically the same sound here. So if I come to the mixer and see what sounds you've actually used here, uh, it's the heck is it? Fretless bass. Is that really what that was? The fretless bass sound? Um, that's just what a fretless bass sounds like, synthesized in an octave that a fretless bass can't actually play. So, anyhow, uh, very, very cool. So, there's so many things to talk about because to me this is just like a good textbook example of a lot of things that I would want to talk about. So first of all, just the way the accompaniment is put together is very in keeping with pianistic style. There's this kind of repeating pattern that happens without beating us over the head with it. The do don ga don don do don do don ga don ga, right, in the left hand, and then it gets broken up with this little figure, right? But this thing we call a motor rhythm. Do don ga don do don do don. A repeating pattern that happens, and then the way the right hand works with it. If I go back to here, so the way the hands all work together all feels very, very stylistically appropriate, and that's how this kind of piano playing goes. You're trying to establish a rhythm in the absence of bass and drums to do it for you. Now, I will point out that the pedal is not notated correctly, in that these angle brackets here are meant to join up. So what happened is, I think you probably selected the measure and then entered that bracket. That's not the way to do it. You select where the actual range you want the bracket to end here. So you need to select all the way to that note. Then, when you go to the lines palette and click the appropriate pedal marking, which should start squared off. Well, I'll start off angled because it's continued from the previous line. You'll see now it joins up perfectly there. And then same with this one. Instead of doing it that way, you select from here to there. You actually tell it the last note, and then when you click the marking, it actually joins up perfectly. Now, you don't have to delete them all like I was doing there. There's a very simple shortcut that will take one that you've entered incorrectly and just shift right will move that note. It moves the line left or right, right? See how it's moving as I go. Oh, I didn't turn on my demo mode because, I'm not in the cafe, so I'm not really thinking about such things, but um, it's still worth looking at. So shift right moves the endpoint of a line over like that. So anyhow, that's how you want it to look. Okay, so you've got this nice repeating rhythm. The chords are voiced nicely. You've got kind of roots and fifths mostly in the left hand, and the right hand's got this nice balance of filling out the chord, not focusing on roots because the roots already been stated in the bass for the most part. In places like this, we're using an inversion, so the bass doesn't have the root. Now you do have the root in the chord voicing. This is how you write. This is how you do it. So the F major chord doesn't have an actual F in it. It's got a G. It's got a ninth instead of the root. And then it's got the third A and the fifth C and the seventh E. The root was in the bass. We don't need to repeat it in the right hand. Because if we did repeat it, we wouldn't have enough fingers left over to play the rest of the chord. You could kind of possibly squeeze that F in there by, barely, because you got lucky. They're all white notes there. You don't have to do any weird stretches, but then it's just too cluttered of a sound. This idea that we omit the root and replace it with a ninth in a middle register chord voicing like this. That's what you want to do in writing in this style. So keeping the bass in this pedal point, as it's called. That pedal point, keeping that F constant, is a nice device. The use of this line here, C to D to E to D, like listen for that. Great writing. That's how you do it. So yeah, to me, Gene, this is just like just really textbook thing. So I don't know that it's Gene. I doubt it's Gene's first tune ever written. I would find that hard to believe, but if so, extremely impressive. But I believe it's the first one he's posted to MuseScore. Um, so anyhow, yeah, so all this stuff, and then the way the melody is harmonized here using parallel sixths mostly, where that makes sense. It's just really nicely done here. I mean, you could have made this also be. He chose to keep A in that alto voice there. He could have gone with parallel sixths both ways through. Whoops, let me do that. Right, that's fine too. Then that, assuming that you're going to have two singers singing this in harmony, then they would both be moving rather than one of them kind of sitting still on the C the whole measure. But there's nothing wrong with that either. And there's a nice balance between places where it's moving in parallel. Because look at all this parallel sixth here. Those parallel six are just a really, really nice sound. Parallel six and parallel thirds. In Emmeline's piece, we had the parallel thirds happening through here. There are six that are happening within some of these voicings, probably. Actually, as I'm looking at it, I'm seeing more sevenths and other intervals. But in any case, they're not like a string of parallel six the way she's got a string of parallel thirds. But a six is just a third upside down, right? If I took this D, moved it above the B, well, now it's a third. They're just inversions of each other, thirds and sixths. So this parallel thirds, parallel sixths, you do that all day long. It's going to sound nice. And the times you get away from that are the places where you don't like how that sound would actually work, like if the note that you'd have to put below is not a note that fits the chord well. And so there's some places here where maybe that happened. And I'm actually looking in the places I see where he's not putting the sixth below. He actually probably could have. This F9 here, if he had made a below that, it would have been flat, which wouldn't have been my first choice for an F7 chord. That B flat would have been the fourth on a chord that has a third. Again, that's a sound that is a sound, and I like it in the right context. Emmeline used it effectively. I use it in different worlds, but I think here was a good situation to not use it. I think Gene's choice to say, hey, let's not have a sixth. Notice this measure. He starts off with sixths and aims for a third here. He's got a sixth between these two voices. Boy, that red circle is nice, isn't it? So he's got a sixth between these two voices, sixth between those two voices, third between those, and then the alto voice is, while the soprano voice is moving up in steps, the alto voice is having to jump a little bit to catch up so that it can end up only a third away. And so this is nice writing. That's how you do it. This is just really, really well done. And then this passage here. Right, the melody, spring, 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 and the alto voice, spring, spring, and then spring. Right, I mean that's all. That voice. One voice held a common tone, the other one moved up in half steps like that. This progression here, that use of that diminished chord is kind of a passing chord. That's like really kind of classically good stuff, also. So prefer C6 where C is in melody. Oh, you're talking about the writing of the chorus, Samuel? I can't remember it. You go by Sam. So where's the C6 you're talking about? Because I do want to speak to that because I almost mentioned it talking about the real book yesterday in the cafe. There's C7s. There's places like this where it's a dominant chord. Oh, maybe it's after the modulation. Here we go. Must be somewhere in this section. Anyhow, there is a general rule of thumb that says maybe this is where you're talking about whether it is or not. That's might as well be. There is a general convention that the real book uses and some other fake books use that say if you are writing a chord and you want it to sound like a jazz chord or whatever, and you want to indicate that it's not just a triad, we generally call it a major seventh most of the time, unless the root is in the melody. And then they typically call it a sixth chord because they're afraid you might voice it with a major seventh and it sounds bad. Now, in point of fact, it doesn't sound bad. Listen to this. This B here and that C are two different voices happening at this in different octaves at different times. It doesn't actually get in the way. So there's no reason to have this be a C6 chord. But it is a common convention in writing lead sheets, especially, that if the root is prominently featured in the melody, you call the chord a sixth chord. The other time you call it a sixth chord is if the sixth is in the melody. And the other time you call it a sixth chord is if you're writing a song about, you're writing basically sound went off, but here, one second. You're writing a song about trains because that sixth chord is the stereotypical sound of a train. In fact, if you've ever flown into Denver International Airport, that is the sound of the train is arriving at the station. For the commuter train that runs to the airport. So anyhow, these are just all these things that are just done so beautifully. This really nice key change that happens to go into A here, and then using some of the same harmonies. And of course, how could I not comment on the loveliness of 4, minor 4, right? You know how much I love that chord, and this is why it has this beautiful sound. So he's got 1, then 1 is a dominant seventh, and then 4, and then minor 4, and does it with that descending bass line, which is its own little kind of a wonderful cliche there of F. Let's listen to it. F, is the seventh, E is the third, D flat is the minor third, and then down to the fifth of the next of the F chord. This is all using this language that is just the bread and butter of songwriting in this style, of this kind of jazz pop kind of style. It's just really, really well done. And these little figures are just little fun little figures to throw in there. And so yeah, and this little boom 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 boom, a little disco bass line, gotta love that too. So anyhow, this is just love the song, think you did a great job, and those are some of the things I want to talk about. Oh, and even there's just still so much, right? This is a 2-5-1 B minor to E7 to A, 2-5-1 in A major, and the voice leading here in the piano part and in the voices, but the F sharp to F natural, the flat 9 on the E7 to E, that little line, the fifth of the 2 chord resolving to the flat 9 of the 5 chord, resolving to the fifth of the 1 chord. Just beautiful. This is how it's done. I mean, this is just a great kind of textbook example of how to do this kind of stuff. So that's our show. So I really hope you've enjoyed as much as I have some of the music that we've looked at here, and I think I'm going to play us out. So this time, since we didn't hear the theme music before, I'm gonna make sure we hear it this time. Well, I can't make sure we do, but I suspect that we will. So here we go. I gotta start at the beginning. So thanks so much for being here, and by all means, keep writing the music. I need to kill my sound here so it doesn't mess up the speakers, right? If I mute it, you can still hear it, I hope. I'm just going to turn down the speaker. Maybe that works better than actually muting. Either way, whatever. You're either getting music or you're not. Hopefully you are, because I took the trouble to write it. But we do this every week, so I hope you can come back and join us next week. Keep writing music, keep posting it, and I've got some new stuff coming as far as how I want to organize this. Getting really excited at the possibility of building this new kind of community site where we can have more discussions and stuff. So I hopefully we'll share something about that in another few weeks. So keep writing music. It's still spring. April is spring song month. So by all means, submit some more spring songs for me to look at. I'm going to look at, I got some more stuff to talk about fugues next week and whatever else that comes up. So hope everyone has a great week, and I will catch you next time.